The pulsing lights of Ceres' Hope Command Center were giving Adrian Cole a headache. Not that he needed any help with that. His brain was already performing impressive acrobatics, trying to remember the 17 formal greetings appropriate for Loha warriors of varying ranks. "Status report on our guests, Melody?" Adrian asked, flipping frantically through the interplanetary diplomatic handbook while trying not to sweat through his neatly pressed uniform. "The Loha delegation will dock in approximately 7 minutes, Adrian," replied the ship's AI assistant, her voice carrying that perfectly calibrated tone of polite amusement. "May I suggest you might want to stop hyperventilating? Your current breathing pattern is raising alarms in 3 separate systems." "I'm not hyperventilating," Adrian said, hyperventilating. "I'm just rehearsing, rapidly, with my lungs." The truth was, Adrian Cole had never expected to be the one handling first contact with Aloha warriors. He was supposed to be the junior aide who took notes and smiled at appropriate intervals while Ambassador while Ambassador Okafor handled the delicate diplomatic dance. But the ambassador was currently in the medical bay, his face swollen to twice its normal size after an unfortunate encounter with Star Seaweed Salad at last night's pre-meeting banquet. "Don't panic," Adrian whispered to himself, an incantation that somehow always achieved the opposite effect. "Don't panic, don't panic, don't panic." Saying it 4 times doesn't make it more effective, Melody chimed in. One of the warning lights flickered in what Adrian could only interpret as AI judgment. "Melody, please just tell me, did I memorize the greeting correctly? We stand under the shared stars as equal warriors in pursuit of celestial harmony." Close. The actual translation is "we stand beneath shared stars as allied forces in pursuit of cosmic balance." The Loha are very particular about the distinction between equal and allied, as well as celestial versus cosmic. Adrian's stomach performed an elaborate somersault. That's not what the handbook says. The handbook was last updated 9 months ago. The Loha have had 3 minor linguistic revolutions since then. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Adrian's voice climbed several octaves. "I'm telling you now," Melody replied cheerfully. "Docking sequence initiating. Loha vessel will be secured in 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Adrian had 3 minutes to learn a completely new greeting protocol for a species known primarily for their unforgiving adherence to ritualistic honor codes. The same species whose alliance was crucial to humanity's standing in the Galactic Union. "I'm going to be responsible for starting an interstellar war," Adrian muttered, pacing across the polished floor of the reception area. "They'll erase Earth from navigational charts. They'll turn my name into a synonym for catastrophic diplomatic failure." "That seems statistically unlikely," Melody said, "though I am updating my failure scenarios database, just in case." The docking bay doors began their slow, dramatic parting, clearly designed for ceremonial effect rather than efficiency. Through the widening gap, Adrian caught his first glimpse of the Loha delegation. Leading the procession was Commander Shora, her impressive height amplified by the sleek bio-armor that contoured to her powerful frame. The armor glowed with a deep crimson energy that pulsed in time with what Adrian assumed was either her heartbeat or some manifestation of her warrior spirit. Behind her, a formation of smaller escort drones hovered, their metallic surfaces reflecting the docking bay lights in hypnotic patterns. Adrian straightened his posture, cleared his throat, and prepared to deliver the greeting he'd just learned. The final set of doors parted. The pressure equalized with a hiss that ruffled Adrian's carefully combed hair. Commander Shora stepped forward, her movement fluid despite the formidable armor. Her facial features were striking, sharp angles softened by an almost luminescent quality to her skin. Her eyes, 3 symmetrical orbs arranged in a triangular pattern, focused intensely on Adrian. It was at this precise moment that Adrian Cole's diplomatic training deserted him entirely. His carefully memorized greeting evaporated from his mind, replaced by a single, overwhelming observation. "Wow," he breathed, the word escaping before he could catch it. "You're kinda goo." The silence that followed was so absolute Adrian could hear the electrical hum of the ship's systems. The escort drones behind Commander Shora actually backed up several inches. One of the Loha officers dropped a ceremonial staff, the clang of metal on metal painfully loud in the stillness. And Commander Shora, intimidating, unflappable Commander Shora, was changing color. Her bioarmor, previously a deep, powerful red, was now brightening, rapidly shifting to a brilliant crimson that illuminated the entire docking bay. The light was so intense that Adrian had to squint. Oh no! Melody's voice came softly through Adrian's earpiece. The other Loha warriors were staring at their commander, their three-eyed gazes reflecting clear astonishment. One whispered to another, "Did he just issue a challenge? Or make a blood oath?" Adrian stood frozen, mortification washing over him in waves. He tried to form words, any words that might salvage the situation. I meant, that is to say, Commander Shora hadn't moved a muscle. Her armor continued to glow that impossible red, and her triad of eyes remained fixed on Adrian with an intensity that made him feel like he was being scanned at the molecular level. Perhaps, Melody suggested quietly in his ear, we should adjourn to the conference room. Adrian managed a shaky nod and gestured weakly toward the interior of the ship. Yes, this way please. His voice was a strangled whisper. As the delegation began to move, the other Loha warriors giving their commander a wide berth, Adrian realized he might have just committed the most spectacular diplomatic blunder in human history. And he had no idea what it meant that the fearsome Commander Shora was still glowing like a supernova. Would you care to explain exactly what happened out there? Captain Torres asked, her normally composed features twisted into an expression that somehow combined disbelief, horror, and a desperate need to laugh. Adrian sat slumped in his chair at the emergency briefing room, watching as Melody projected the footage from the docking bay. There he was in high definition, staring at Commander Shora with undisguised wonder and uttering those fateful words, "You're kinda goo." Then came the transformation, Shora's armor shifting from standard battle red to something that resembled a miniature sun. The playback also captured a series of unusual sounds emitting from her armor, a harmonic resonance that hadn't registered to Adrian at the time. I panicked, Adrian said miserably. I forgot the greeting and then I just said what came to mind. What came to mind? Repeated Ambassador Okafor, who had been hastily retrieved from the medical bay. His face was still somewhat swollen, giving his stern expression a slightly comical quality that did nothing to lessen Adrian's dread. Do you have any idea what you've done? Insulted a decorated commander of the most militaristic species in the quadrant? Adrian guessed. Worse, Okafor said. You've initiated a warrior bond request. Adrian blinked. A what? In Loha culture, personal appearance is never discussed casually. Commenting on a warrior's appearance, particularly using terms that translate to appealing or attractive, is considered equivalent to a declaration of interest in a warrior unification. Which is, Adrian prompted, though he was fairly certain he didn't want to know. A sacred ritual of alliance, Captain Torres explained, either for battle partnership or something more permanent. The implications slowly dawned on Adrian. Are you saying I accidentally propositioned Commander Shora? Not exactly propositioned, Okafor corrected. More like initiated a courtship ritual that's also a military alliance pact. Adrian dropped his head into his hands. This can't be happening. The resonance from her armor, Melody interjected, replaying the harmonic sounds, matches the frequency patterns documented in Loha bonding ceremonies. It appears her armor responded automatically to your declaration. But I didn't make a declaration. Adrian protested. I just said she was cute. By their standards, that's approximately equivalent to saying, I find you worthy of genetic or strategic alliance, Okafor said, wincing as he touched his still swollen cheek. The Loha don't separate compliments from commitments. Adrian stared at the frozen image of Commander Shora, her armor glowing with that impossible brightness. What do I do? How do I fix this? Captain Torres and Ambassador Okafor exchanged glances. You need to speak with her privately, Torres said finally. Explain that there was a cultural misunderstanding. The Loha value directness, at least. And if that doesn't work? Adrian asked. Okafor sighed. Then we may have to rethink our entire approach to the alliance negotiations. The Loha take these rituals very seriously. You're saying I could derail peace talks between our species because I called someone cute? Adrian's voice cracked on the last word. It wouldn't be the strangest reason for diplomatic failure in galactic history, Torres said, attempting comfort and failing spectacularly. Remember the Trilaxian umbrella incident? Adrian didn't, but he wasn't in the mood for a historical tangent. I'll talk to her, he said, standing up with as much dignity as he could muster. I'll explain everything. Good luck, Okafor said. And Adrian, try not to compliment anything else about her. Not her armor, not her weapons, nothing. Just stick to the facts. Understood, Adrian said, heading for the door with the energy of someone walking to their own execution. For what it's worth, Melody's voice came softly through his earpiece as the door closed behind him. This is the most interesting first contact I've been part of in 73 years of service. Definitely not helping Melody. The guest quarters assigned to the Loha delegation were in the starboard section of Ceres Hope, decorated in the neutral blues and silvers that diplomatic protocol deemed inoffensive to most species. Adrian stood outside Commander Shora's door, rehearsing his apology for the 17th time. Commander Shora, he practiced under his breath. I need to clarify that in human culture, the term cute is a casual observation with no binding implications. The door slid open before he could knock, revealing Commander Shora. She had removed the outer layers of her bioarmor, leaving only the fitted base layer that outlined her muscular form. Without the full armor, Adrian could see the intricate pattern of battle scars that decorated her arms and neck, marks of honor in Loha culture. You are distressed, she stated, her three eyes studying him with unsettling intensity. Yes, Adrian admitted, momentarily thrown by her directness. May I come in? I think we need to discuss what happened earlier. Shora stepped aside, allowing him entry. The quarters were sparse. She had arranged the furniture to maximize open space in the center of the room, and her ceremonial weapons were displayed with methodical precision on one wall. Commander, Adrian began, carefully keeping his gaze on a neutral point just past her shoulder, I need to explain something about human communication. When I said you were, that word, I didn't understand its implications in your culture. Shora tilted her head slightly. You referred to me as cute, she said, the words sounding oddly formal in her measured voice. Yes, that. In human terms, it's simply a friendly observation. It carries no promise or challenge. It's casual. Shora was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she asked, in Loha language, to call someone beautiful or attractive is a vow or a challenge. Is this not true in human communication? Adrian shifted uncomfortably. Well, it can be significant, but it depends on context. Sometimes it's just something you say. You say things without meaning. Shora's tone wasn't judgmental, merely curious. Not without meaning exactly, just without binding commitment. Adrian was struggling to explain social niceties to someone from a culture where every word carried the weight of honor. We have different words and contexts for when we're making promises or declarations. Shora considered this. So you did not intend to initiate a warrior bond? No, Adrian said, relief flooding through him. Exactly. It was a cultural misunderstanding. I see. Was it his imagination, or did something like disappointment flicker across her features? This is unfortunate timing. Unfortunate. The Loha High Council has been informed of the incident. They have sent observers to monitor the situation. Adrian's momentary relief evaporated. Observers? What? In our culture, such declarations are not made lightly. To retract them is uncommon. Shora's armor, even in its reduced form, pulsed slightly redder. Some elders believe you should be returned to Earth immediately for the insult. And what do you believe? Adrian asked, suddenly very aware of how much taller and stronger she was. Shora's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Adrian couldn't interpret. I believe in understanding before judgment. You have explained your meaning. I accept that there was no intent to deceive. Thank you, Adrian breathed. So we can just move past this and continue with the alliance negotiations. It is not so simple, Shora said. The incident has been witnessed and recorded. The council will require resolution. What kind of resolution? Before Shora could answer, Adrian noticed something moving near his feet. A small, fluffy creature with 6 legs and iridescent fur was winding itself around his ankles. It looked something like a cross between a cat and a jellyfish, its translucent tendrils gently wrapping around his calf. Oh, what's this? He asked, momentarily distracted. A bond fluff? Shora said, and there was definite alarm in her voice now. It is a ceremonial animal. It should not be here. It's very impressive, Adrian said carefully, remembering Okafor's warning about compliments. The creature purred, its tendrils tightening slightly. Shora made a quick movement, reaching for the creature, but it had already climbed halfway up Adrian's leg, purring more loudly. This is problematic, she said. The bond fluff is attracted to potential pairs. It was sent by the elders to test our compatibility. And what's it doing now? Adrian asked, trying not to panic as the creature continued its upward journey. Claiming you as suitable, Shora said, and to Adrian's astonishment, her facial skin flushed with the same bright red as her armor had earlier. This complicates matters further. As Adrian stood there, a fluffy alien attached to his torso, and a blushing warrior commander staring at him with 3 wide eyes, he couldn't help but think that complicated was perhaps the understatement of the galactic century. Over the next few days, Ceres Hope transformed from a diplomatic vessel into what felt to Adrian like an elaborate stage for a series of increasingly awkward cultural exchanges. Captain Torres, determined to salvage the situation, had arranged a program of events designed to foster understanding between humans and Aloha, which was how Adrian found himself assigned as Commander Shora's personal guide, despite his protest that he was possibly the least qualified person for the job. You created this situation, Torres had told him bluntly. You get to help fix it. So here he was, in the ship's hydroponics lab, carefully explaining Earth's botanical research, while trying very hard not to use any adjectives that might be misinterpreted as declarations of eternal devotion. These are genetically modified orchids, Adrian said, gesturing to a row of vibrant flowers. They're designed to produce oxygen at 3 times the rate of standard plants, making them valuable for long-term space missions. Shora observed the plants with careful attention. In the days since their private conversation, she had maintained a formal distance, though Adrian occasionally caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Your species has a curious relationship with modification, she noted. You alter plants, yet your own genetic structure remains largely unchanged. We have a long history of ethical debates about human genetic modification, Adrian explained. He never finished the sentence because at that moment, one of the experimental plants released a cloud of golden pollen directly into their faces. Adrian sneezed violently while Shora stood perfectly still, though her 3 eyes blinked rapidly. I apologize, came the voice of Dr. Patel over the lab's communication system. That shouldn't have happened. The flower wasn't scheduled to release pollen for another week. Adrian wiped his watering eyes. Is it dangerous? Not dangerous, no, Patel said, with the hesitant tone of someone choosing their words carefully. It might cause some mild perceptual effects. Nothing to worry about. Should wear off in an hour or so. Perceptual effects? Adrian repeated, already feeling a strange, tingling sensation in his extremities. Mild hallucinations, Patel clarified. Very mild. Barely worth mentioning, really. Shora turned to Adrian, and he noticed with alarm that the edges of her form seemed to be trailing color as she moved, like visual echoes. Your laboratory security protocols are interesting, she said, her voice sounding as though it were coming through water. I'm so sorry about this. Adrian said, feeling a bubble of inappropriate laughter rising in his chest. Everything was becoming slightly hilarious, including the fact that Shora now appeared to have 5 eyes instead of 3. This isn't a standard part of the tour. I am experiencing unusual sensory input, Shora announced, staring at her hand as though it had personally betrayed her. Your plants are aggressive negotiators. This struck Adrian as the funniest thing he'd ever heard, and he dissolved into helpless laughter. After a moment of confusion, Shora's mouth twitched in what might have been the Loha equivalent of amusement. Perhaps, she said, her voice taking on an unusual lilt. This is not unlike the mist rituals of Loha's southern continent. What are those? Adrian asked, fascinated by the way the lights seemed to be dancing around Shora's head like tiny stars. Ceremonies where warriors inhale sacred vapors to achieve battle clarity, she explained, making a gesture that left trails of light in the air. Though I'm not experiencing anything resembling clarity at present. For the next hour, they sat on a laboratory floor, watching the ceiling appear to ripple like water and exchanging observations about their respective cultures that became increasingly philosophical and decreasingly coherent. By the time the effects began to wear off, Adrian had learned more about Loha poetry than any human diplomat had previously documented, and Shora had developed an appreciation for what she called the charming illogic of human idioms. So, Adrian said as the world finally stopped shimmering, I guess this wasn't the cultural exchange Captain Torres had in mind. It was illuminating, Shora replied, and Adrian was almost certain he saw the hint of a smile. As they made their way back to the main areas of the ship, Adrian couldn't help feeling that something had shifted between them. The formal distance remained, but beneath it was a new thread of understanding, fragile, but undeniably present. The diplomatic reception that evening was held in Ceres Hope's largest gathering space, transformed for the occasion with lighting designed to complement both human and Loha visual preferences. Representatives from both delegations mingled cautiously while servers circulated with carefully selected refreshments. Adrian, still slightly disoriented from the afternoon's botanical adventure, was doing his best to stay inconspicuous near a decorative water feature when Captain Torres appeared at his side. How are things progressing with Commander Shora? She asked quietly. We're reaching understanding, Adrian said carefully, though I'm not sure if that's resolving the situation or making it more complicated. Torres nodded. Ambassador Okafor has been in discussions with the Loha elders. They're intransigent on certain points, meaning they expect resolution of this bond one way or another before proceeding with alliance negotiations. Torres sighed. You've unknowingly triggered something deeply significant in their culture. But surely they understand it was a misunderstanding, Adrian protested. Shora seemed to accept my explanation. Individual understanding and cultural protocols are different matters, Torres said. The Loha operate on precedent and ritual. There are few examples in their history of a warrior bond being initiated and then abandoned without consequence. Before Adrian could respond, a commotion near the refreshment table caught their attention. Shora, who had been sampling human beverages with careful deliberation, had apparently encountered something unexpected. She was making a sound Adrian hadn't heard before, a sort of harmonic vibration that seemed to emanate from both her throat and her armor. He hurried over, Torres close behind. Commander, are you all right? Shora turned to him, her 3 eyes wide. This liquid, it contains an alarming amount of sucrose. It's called punch, Adrian explained, trying not to smile at her reaction. It's meant to be sweet. It is aggressive in its sweetness, Shora declared, setting down her glass with precise care. As she did so, her arm brushed against Adrian's, causing her to startle slightly. The movement sent the glass toppling, spilling bright red punch down the front of Adrian's formal uniform. Oh! Adrian jumped back, but too late, the damage was done. The liquid had thoroughly soaked his chest and was rapidly spreading down toward his waist. I have damaged your ceremonial attire, Shora said, genuine distress in her voice. This is dishonorable. It's fine, really, Adrian assured her, grabbing a napkin to blot the worst of it. Accidents happen. The gathered diplomats had fallen silent, watching the exchange with varying degrees of interest and concern. Adrian, uncomfortably aware of the attention, tried to laugh it off. At least the color matches your armor, he said without thinking. Shora's skin flushed that now familiar bright red, and her armor pulsed in sync. The watching Loha warriors murmured among themselves. Adrian started to backpedal, then stopped as he realized he was making things worse. What I meant to say is that you have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen in any galaxy. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Adrian instantly wished he could snatch them back, but it was too late. The entire reception hall had gone silent. One of the Loha elders dropped a ceremonial goblet, which shattered on the floor with spectacular timing. That was not what I intended to say, Adrian whispered, mortified. Shora stood perfectly still, her armor now glowing so brightly it cast shadows on the walls. The other Loha were staring at her with expressions that ranged from shocked to intrigued. One of the younger warriors was actually recording the scene with a small device. I believe, Captain Torres said under her breath, that you have just escalated the situation considerably. Adrian wanted the floor to open and eject him into space. Instead, he stood dripping punch onto his shoes while the assembled diplomats of two species watched in fascinated silence. Shora, to her credit, recovered first. I must attend to preparations for tomorrow's council meeting, she announced to the room at large. With a formal nod to Adrian that revealed nothing of her thoughts, she turned and exited the reception with the precise dignity of someone determined not to run. As conversations slowly resumed around them, Torres gave Adrian a look that managed to combine sympathy with exasperation. You might want to change your uniform, she suggested, and perhaps practice saying absolutely nothing for the rest of the evening. Adrian nodded miserably and headed for his quarters, leaving a trail of sticky red footprints in his wake. That night, unable to sleep, Adrian found himself in the ship's library, searching through every available resource on Loha culture and traditions. Most of the information was frustratingly general. The Loha were notoriously private about their deeper cultural practices, but he did find references to something called the Red Heart Accord. According to the sparse text, this was a ceremony performed when two warriors, or any worthy beings, bestow special recognition upon each other. The name Red Heart appeared to relate to a biological response in which a Loha's natural armor or skin would flush red when recognizing a worthy counterpart. Melody, Adrian called quietly. Can you find me more information about this Red Heart Accord? The AI's voice emanated softly from the nearest console. I have limited data, but I can tell you it appears to be a ritual that precedes formal alliances between Loha and, rarely, members of other species. It involves a form of empathic connection facilitated by ceremonial crystals. Empathic connection? Adrian frowned. Like mind reading? More like emotional resonance, Melody clarified. The ceremony determines whether two individuals are compatible for extended collaboration, either in battle, governance, or personal partnership. Adrian slumped in his chair. So my compliment might have activated the first stage of this ritual. It appears so, Melody confirmed. The color change in Commander Shora's armor is consistent with the initial recognition phase described in anthropological records. And is there a way to respectfully exit this process? Adrian asked hopefully. There was a pause before Melody answered. The records are unclear. The Red Heart Accord is considered sacred by the Loha. Initiating it without intention would be problematic. Adrian stared at the text scrolling on the screen. But what if there was intention? Not initially, perhaps, but he trailed off, thinking of Shora's quiet dignity, her careful observations, the flicker of humor he'd glimpsed during their pollen-induced hallucinations. He thought of how she'd spoken of losing a loved one in past conflicts, which had shaped her dedication to duty and honor. Adrian, Melody said gently, interrupting his thoughts, are you developing genuine feelings for Commander Shora? I don't know, he admitted, but I do respect her, and I find her fascinating. Perhaps that's something to consider before tomorrow's council meeting, Melody suggested. The Loha value honesty above all. Whatever you decide, be truthful with them and with yourself. Adrian nodded slowly, continuing to read as the night cycle of the ship gradually gave way to the artificial dawn. The neutral planet Drios 9 was famous for its perfectly maintained atmospheric conditions and strict neutrality in galactic politics, making it the ideal location for sensitive negotiations. As Ceres Hope entered orbit, Adrian stood at a viewport, watching the swirling blue-green surface come into view. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Captain Torres said, joining him. "It is," Adrian agreed, then added, in a completely non-binding, observation-only way. Torres smiled slightly. "I've spoken with Ambassador Okafor. The situation is complicated." "When isn't it?" Adrian sighed. "The Loha High Council has issued what amounts to an ultimatum," Torres continued. "They believe the Red Heart Accord has been initiated, and they expect it to be either completed or formally rejected before alliance negotiations can proceed. And rejection would be seen as an insult," Adrian guessed. "More than an insult," Torres confirmed. "A betrayal of sacred trust. It could set back human-Loha relations by decades." Adrian turned away from the viewport. "So either I participate in a ceremony I don't fully understand, potentially binding myself to Commander Shora in some way, or I risk the alliance our entire mission was meant to secure. That's the essence of it, yes." Torres's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I can't tell you what to do, Adrian. This has moved beyond standard diplomatic protocol. But I will say that Commander Shora has been defending your position to her elders. She's argued that you should not be held to standards you weren't aware of." This surprised Adrian. "She has, according to our liaisons, quite forcefully." Torres gave him a considering look. "Whatever you decide, I suggest you speak with her before the council convenes." Adrian nodded, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and something else, something warmer and more complicated, in his chest. "I will." He found Shora in one of the ship's observation lounges, standing alone before a vast window that framed the gleaming surface of Drios 9. She was fully armored now, her biosuit glowing with subdued crimson energy. "Commander," Adrian said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Shora turned, her three eyes focusing on him with that intense gaze that had become almost familiar. "Adrian Cole, I was hoping to speak with you. I wanted to talk to you too." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "I've learned about the Red Heart Accord." "Yes," she said simply. "I suspected you would investigate. The council expects us to complete it or reject it," Adrian said. "But I wanted to hear from you first. What do you want?" Shora was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the planet below. "I do not wish to force you into a sacred bond you do not understand or desire," she said finally. "It would dishonor us both." "That's not what I asked," Adrian pressed gently. "What do you want, Shora?" Her armor pulsed slightly brighter. "In my many cycles as a warrior, I have never experienced the Red Heart response," she admitted. "It is rare, even among my people. When you spoke that word, cute, and my armor responded, I was surprised, confused, but not unhappy." Adrian ventured. Shora turned to face him fully. "I lost my bond sibling in the Tarishan conflict," she said. "Since then, I have dedicated myself to duty alone. I did not expect to find resonance with anyone, especially not a human diplomat who speaks without thinking." Adrian couldn't help smiling at that. Fair assessment. Yet in our time together, I have observed qualities in you that are valued among the Loha. Courage despite fear, honesty despite consequence, adaptability despite tradition. Her three eyes blinked in sequence. "These are worthy traits. I've come to admire you too," Adrian said. "Your patience, your sense of honor, your willingness to understand different perspectives. I didn't plan any of this, but I can't honestly say I regret it either." Shora's armor brightened slightly. "Then you would consider completing the accord?" "I would," Adrian said, surprising himself with his certainty. "Not just for diplomatic reasons, but because I want to understand. I want to see where this leads." For the first time since they'd met, Shora's mouth curved into what was unmistakably a smile. You continue to surprise me, Adrian Cole. I continue to surprise myself, he admitted. So what happens now? Now, Shora said, her expression becoming solemn again. We face the High Council together. The central plaza of Drio's Nine's diplomatic quarter was an architectural marvel, a perfect circle open to the sky, surrounded by gracefully arching structures that represented the various founding members of the Galactic Union. In the center stood a raised dais where the most significant treaties and alliances were traditionally formalized. Today, that dais had been prepared for the Red Heart Accord. A crystalline structure that resembled a blooming flower stood at its center, catching the light of Drio's Nine's twin suns and scattering it in complex patterns across the gathered delegates. Adrian, dressed in formal attire that incorporated Loha symbolic patterns, hastily fabricated by Ceres Hope's textile synthesizers, stood at the edge of the plaza with Captain Torres and Ambassador Okafor. Are you certain about this? Okafor asked. His face finally returned to its normal proportions. Once initiated, the accord cannot be easily undone. I'm sure, Adrian said, surprised by his own calm. It feels right. Torres squeezed his shoulder briefly. Then represent humanity well. Across the plaza, Shora emerged from a gathering of Loha officials. Her armor had been augmented for the occasion, with additional layers that enhanced its natural luminescence. She looked powerful, majestic, and somehow vulnerable all at once. As if by prearranged signal, they both began walking toward the dais from opposite sides. The assembled delegates fell silent, watching with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. When they reached the center, Adrian looked up at Shora. She stood a full head taller than him, and found her three eyes already focused on his face. Are you prepared? She asked quietly. As I'll ever be, he replied with a small smile. One of the Loha elders stepped forward, speaking in the resonant tones of their formal language. Melody translated through Adrian's discreet earpiece. The Red Heart Accord is ancient, born when the stars were young. It recognizes that souls may find each other across the divisions of species, space, and time. When two beings resonate in harmony, their alliance strengthens not only themselves, but all they touch. The elder gestured to the crystalline structure. Place your hands upon the empathic crystal. It will determine the truth of your connection. Adrian and Shora stepped forward simultaneously. They each reached out, placing their palms against the cool surface of the crystal. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The crystal flared with brilliant light, and Adrian felt a curious sensation, as though the boundaries of his consciousness were suddenly permeable. Images, emotions, and memories that were not his own flowed into his mind. He saw Shora as a young warrior, fierce and determined, standing proudly during her initiation ceremony. He felt her devastating grief when her bond sibling fell in battle, the emptiness that followed, the dedication to duty that became her shield against further loss. He experienced her confusion and unexpected spark of interest when a nervous human diplomat called her cute, the unfamiliar warmth that had rushed through her, turning her armor the brightest red it had ever been. And he knew, without doubt, that she was experiencing his memories as well. His childhood dreams of exploring distant worlds, his struggles to be taken seriously in the diplomatic corps, his fear of failure balanced against his determination to build connections between different peoples. His genuine admiration for her strength, her dignity, her unexpected gentleness. The crystal's glow intensified, spreading outward in waves of crimson light that enveloped the entire plaza. Adrian heard gasps from the assembled delegates, but they seemed distant, unimportant compared to the profound connection he was experiencing. Gradually, the light began to fade, and Adrian became aware of his physical surroundings again. He was still standing before Shora, their hands still touching the crystal between them. But something fundamental had changed. He could feel a new awareness in his mind. Not Shora's thoughts, exactly, but a sense of her presence, like knowing someone was in the next room without seeing or hearing them. The Loha elder stepped forward again, looking both surprised and pleased. The Accord recognizes your harmony, they announced. The bond is true. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several of the younger Loha warriors were making a gesture of respect toward Shura and, by extension, Adrian. The human delegates looked varying degrees of shocked, impressed, and concerned. What happens now? Adrian asked quietly, his voice barely audible. Shura's 3 eyes met his, and he saw in them a new warmth, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Now we forge our path, she replied. Together, as they stepped down from the dais, the assembled representatives from both species began to applaud, a gesture that seemed to transcend cultural differences. Ambassador Okafor approached, looking both bemused and impressed. Well, he said, I suppose we can proceed with the alliance negotiations now. Yes, said the head of the Loha Council, joining them. The completion of the Red Heart Accord between Commander Shura and Diplomat Cole is an auspicious beginning. We see it as a sign that our peoples are destined for greater harmony. Adrian glanced at Shura, who inclined her head slightly in what he now recognized as a gesture of agreement and support. We are honored to help facilitate this alliance, he said, finding that he truly meant it. As the formal negotiations commenced, Adrian found himself at the center of attention in a way he had never anticipated. The Loha warriors who had previously regarded him with suspicion now treated him with a curious respect. The human diplomats kept shooting him looks that ranged from admiration to outright confusion. You've become something of a legend already, Captain Torres told him during a brief recess. The human who called a Loha warrior cute and ended up bonded to her. Half the delegates think you're the luckiest man in the galaxy, and the other half think you're either a genius or completely insane. What do you think? Adrian asked. Torres smiled. I think you followed your heart and your principles. That's rarely a mistake, even when it leads to unexpected places. Adrian couldn't help but agree as he watched Shura across the room, engaged in earnest conversation with members of both delegations. When she caught his eye and her armor pulsed slightly brighter, he felt that new presence in his mind grow warmer. Whatever path they were forging together, it certainly wouldn't be boring. The signing of the Human-Loha Alliance Treaty took place the following day, with all the ceremony and pomp that such historic occasions demanded. Representatives from across the Galactic Union had arrived to witness the event, and news transmissions were being broadcast to countless worlds. Adrian stood among the Earth delegation, watching as Ambassador Okafor and the Loha High Elder pressed their palms to the treaty crystal, activating its recording functions and sealing the agreement between their peoples. An historic day, murmured a delegate beside him, one that might never have happened if not for your unusual diplomatic approach. Adrian smiled, but said nothing. He had given up trying to explain that he hadn't planned any of this. Sometimes the most important connections happen by accident, or perhaps, as Shura might say, by destiny. Speaking of Shura, she was approaching now, resplendent in her formal armor. The gathered dignitaries parted respectfully to let her pass. The treaty is sealed, she said when she reached Adrian. Our peoples are now formally allied. That's excellent news, Adrian replied, though I'm still not entirely clear on what our personal alliance entails. Shura's mouth curved in that subtle smile he was coming to cherish. It means whatever we wish it to mean, Adrian Cole. The Red Heart Accord creates a connection, but how we honor that connection is for us to determine. That's both reassuring and completely unhelpful, Adrian told her, and was rewarded with a sound he had never heard before. Shura's laugh, a harmonious resonance that made her armor shimmer with patches of gold among the red. You will learn patience yet, she said. We have time. Later, at the celebration feast, Adrian found himself besieged by curious diplomats from various species, all eager to hear firsthand about the human who had accidentally initiated a sacred Loha ritual. Is it true you didn't know what you were doing? Asked a Tralaxian ambassador, their tentacles waving in what might have been amusement. Completely true, Adrian admitted. I just thought she was attractive. Fascinating, said a myriad representative, their compound eyes blinking in sequence. In our culture, aesthetic observations are similarly weighted. Perhaps there's more universal common ground than we realized. By the time Adrian managed to extract himself from the conversation, he was exhausted. He made his way to a quieter corner of the hall, only to find Shura already there, apparently having had the same idea. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" he said, joining her. "Indeed. My people respect solitude after significant ceremonies. Your species seems to prefer extended social interaction." "Not all of us," Adrian assured her. "I'd much rather be somewhere quiet right about now." Shura tilted her head, considering. "The treaty is signed. Our official duties here are complete until tomorrow's departure ceremony." "Are you suggesting we escape?" Adrian asked, intrigued. "I am suggesting we honor both our needs for reflection," Shura said diplomatically. Then, with that hint of humor Adrian was coming to treasure, she added, "If that requires escaping, so be it." They slipped away from the celebration with minimal fuss. Shura's status ensured no one questioned their departure, and Adrian's newly elevated position as the human bonded to Commander Shura granted him similar leeway. They ended up in one of Drio's 9's famous botanical reserves, where carefully maintained specimens from thousands of worlds coexisted in a harmonious ecosystem. In the dim light of the artificial evening, the bioluminescent plants created a peaceful glow that reminded Adrian of Shura's armor. "Much better," he sighed as they walked along a winding path between alien flowers. "I was never cut out for being the center of attention." "Yet you managed it admirably," Shura observed. "You have adapted to circumstances that would overwhelm many warriors." "I had good motivation," Adrian said, glancing at her. "I didn't want to disappoint you or jeopardize the alliance." "And now? What motivates you now that the alliance is secured?" Adrian considered the question carefully. "Curiosity," he said finally, "about what this bond means. About you. About what happens next." Shura nodded, apparently satisfied with his answer. "A worthy motivation. The Loha value the quest for understanding almost as highly as honor itself." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the soft sounds of the nocturnal flora surrounding them. Adrian found himself acutely aware of Shura's presence, both physically beside him and in that new corner of his mind where the bond resided. "May I ask you something?" he said eventually. "Of course. When I first called you cute, what did you feel?" "Really?" Shura was quiet for several steps. Then, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, she said, "Shock, confusion, and recognition. Recognition. Among my people, the red heart response is rare. It only occurs when one recognizes something essential in another, something that resonates with one's deepest nature." Her armor pulsed gently. "I had never experienced it before. I did not expect to experience it with a human." "I'm full of surprises," Adrian said lightly, though he was deeply moved. "Indeed you are, Adrian Cole," Shura agreed. "That may be what I find most attractive about you." Adrian stumbled slightly at her deliberate use of the word, and Shura reached out to steady him, her hand strong and sure on his arm. The touch sent a ripple of warmth through the bond between them. "You did that on purpose," he accused without heat. "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "Your reactions continue to fascinate me." As they continued their walk beneath the luminous canopy, Adrian reflected that his life had taken the most unexpected turn imaginable. A month ago, he had been a junior diplomat worried about advancing his career. Now he was bonded to a Loha warrior commander and instrumental in a historic alliance. All because he called her cute. When they returned to the ship the next day, preparing for departure from Drio's 9, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The previously tense interactions between the human crew and Loha delegates had given way to cautious friendliness. Several of the younger Loha warriors had even been seen attempting human gestures like handshakes and high fives, while human crew members were doing their best to master the complex system of Loha honorifics. "Your bonding has created a positive cultural ripple effect," Melody observed as Adrian prepared for the departure ceremony. "Fascinating from an anthropological perspective. Glad to be of service to science," Adrian said dryly. "Don't be modest," Melody chided. You've accomplished what decades of formal diplomacy failed to do. Created a genuine connection between two historically wary species. Adrian couldn't argue with that, though he still felt something between amusement and disbelief when he thought about how it had all happened. The departure ceremony was brief, but meaningful, with representatives from both species exchanging formal promises of continued cooperation. Adrian stood beside Shora, their new status as bonded partners now officially acknowledged in all diplomatic records. As Ceres Hope broke orbit and set course for its next assignment, Adrian found himself on the observation deck, watching Drio's 9 shrink to a blue-green speck and then disappear entirely. Shora joined him, her armor glowing softly in the dimmed lighting. "New horizons," she commented, standing beside him at the viewport. "New everything," Adrian agreed. "I still can't quite believe how this all turned out." "The universe follows patterns we cannot always predict," Shora said philosophically. "My people believe that some connections are written in the stars long before we recognize them." "That's unexpectedly romantic for a warrior culture," Adrian teased gently. Shora's armor pulsed with that now-familiar brightening. "We're not solely warriors, Adrian Cole. We're also poets, scientists, explorers. As you are not solely a diplomat." "What else am I?" he asked, curious about her perception. She turned to face him fully, her 3 eyes studying him with that intense focus. "You're a bridge builder, a truth speaker, a heart follower." Her mouth curved in that subtle smile. "And you are mine, by the red heart accord." The simple possession in her words sent a warmth through Adrian that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "And you're mine," he said, "which is still the most surprising thing that's ever happened to me." "If I said you were cute now, would you turn red again?" he asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. Shora's armor immediately brightened, confirming his suspicion. "You know the answer to that," she said, a note of playful warning in her voice. "Ido Adrianiknaland smiling. But I enjoy seeing it happen." "Then I will have to find what causes you to display similar reactions," Shora said thoughtfully. "For balance." "Fair enough," Adrian laughed. "I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities." As they stood together watching the stars stream by, Adrian reflected that his diplomatic career had taken a turn he could never have anticipated. But as Shora's presence warmed the newly formed bond between them, he couldn't bring himself to regret a single word, even the one that had started it all. Sometimes the most profound connections began with the simplest observations. Sometimes calling someone cute could change the course of interstellar relations. And sometimes, Adrian thought as Shora's hand found his in the starlight, the universe knew what it was doing after all.